All right, let's jump right in. I want you to picture Europe in the summer of 1914. On the surface, things seem fine, but underneath, well, it's a continent of massive empires, all tangled up in these complicated alliances and simmering with old rivalries. In just a matter of weeks, that entire continent is going to be plunged into a war on a scale nobody had ever seen before.
And that really is the million-dollar question, isn't it? How does a single event, the murder of one guy, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, spiral so completely out of control that it drags the entire world into the trenches? It seems impossible, but the answer is locked inside this chaotic, high-stakes, one-month period we now call the July Crisis.
So, it all kicks off here, with the assassination in Sarajevo. Now, for the Austro-Hungarian Empire, this was more than just a tragedy. They saw it as an opportunity, a golden excuse to finally put their troublesome neighbor Serbia in its place and just crush their nationalist movement for good.
So instead of, engaging in careful diplomacy, they went a different route. They drew up this incredibly harsh ultimatum. We're talking a list of 10 demands that were so extreme, they were basically designed to be rejected. The goal here wasn't to get an apology. The goal was to provoke a no so they'd have a reason to invade.
And here's where it gets really tense. Serbia, believe it or not, actually agreed to almost everything. They bent over backward. But they drew the line at one key point, letting Austrian officials run their own investigation inside Serbia. That, they said, was a total violation of their sovereignty. And for Austria-Hungary, that one little no was all they needed. They declared the entire response a failure. The trap was sprung.
That rejection was the exact trigger Austria-Hungary and their powerful ally Germany were waiting for. It was like the first domino in a long, long line. Suddenly, this whole complicated web of military alliances that had been built up for decades starts to activate, and a local squabble is about to become a full-blown European nightmare.
And maybe the most important domino of all was this: Germany's infamous blank check. This was basically Germany telling Austria-Hungary, hey, do whatever you need to do to Serbia, we've got your back, 100%, no questions asked. This removed any reason for Austria-Hungary to be cautious. It was a green light for war.
Okay, so as Austria-Hungary gets ready to pounce on Serbia, another huge player enters the game: Russia. Russia saw itself as the great protector of the Slavic peoples, including the Serbs. So when they saw what was happening, they started mobilizing their gigantic army. And that single move? It raised the stakes astronomically. It wasn't just about Serbia anymore. It was a direct challenge to Germany.
And now, the clock is really, really ticking. What started as a diplomatic standoff is about to become an absolute military catastrophe. Those last few days of July and the first few days of August were just a blur of threats, ultimatums, and declarations of war. It all happened so fast it's hard to even comprehend. Just look at how quickly this unfolds. It is staggering. July 28th, Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. 4 days later, Germany is at war with Russia. 2 days after that, Germany declares war on France. And the very next day, Britain is in because Germany invaded neutral Belgium to get to France. In less than a week, all the great powers of Europe were at war.
So we've seen what happened. We've seen the timeline. But the really big question is, why? Why did every single effort to pump the brakes to find a peaceful way out fail so miserably? Well, the answers were baked into the system long before that summer. When you look at it, diplomacy never really had a prayer. First, you had those entangling alliances that basically guaranteed a fight between two countries would drag everyone else in. Then, you had these super rigid military timetables. Once a country started mobilizing its army, it was like a massive train that was almost impossible to stop. On top of that, you had just terrible communication between the leaders, a mess of blunders and misunderstandings. And maybe the most toxic ingredient of all was this wave of arrogant, nationalist confidence. Every country was convinced they could win a quick, glorious war. They all wanted to throw the first punch.
When you boil it all down, that's the big, terrifying lesson here. The July Crisis is this perfect, chilling example of how a system that's supposed to create stability can actually do the exact opposite. It shows us that when you have a world full of alliances, rigid war plans, and nationalism running wild, you've basically built a giant powder keg. All it takes is one tiny spark to set the whole thing off.
And that leaves us with one last thing to think about. We've seen just how fast the dominoes of 1914 could fall, leading to a catastrophe that changed the world forever. So it really makes you stop and wonder, doesn't it? What are the complex, interconnected global systems we rely on today? And what are the hidden dominoes just waiting for the wrong push?